Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
So it is January 2006, and we are on one of the absolute grittiest blocks in San Francisco, Shotwell Street.
Oh, yeah, the Office of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or the EFF.
Exactly. It's sandwiched right between two auto repair shops. It sits across from this loud, humming utility substation, and, the sidewalks are just crowded with tents.
Right.
Actually, this specific block held this rather grim city record for having the highest reported amount of human feces on the street. So, when people wandered in off the sidewalk to ring the doorbell, the staff was pretty used to it.
Yeah, they usually got people who are, down on their luck.
Right, or folks who sincerely believed someone had, implanted a microchip in their brain.
Sure.
But on this particular day, the man at the door is completely different. He's in his early 60s. He's wearing a tan trench coat. He has these really intense eyes, a raspy voice. And when the executive director answers the door, he just simply asks, "Do you folks care about privacy?"
Which is an incredible opening line, especially considering he was talking to an organization whose, entire mission is defending digital privacy.
Right. And today, you and I are going to look at the literal plumbing of the internet, the physical cables, the hidden rooms, and the hardware that makes it all work. Welcome to this deep dive.
Yeah, because when they told this guy, yes, they cared, he didn't launch into some conspiracy theory. He said, "I have some information for you. I am a retired AT&T technician, and I know how the NSA is tapping into the internet backbone."
Wow.
Yeah, this is Mark Klein, and he claimed to have the absolute physical proof of mass government surveillance.
Okay, let's unpack this, because Mark Klein's arrival is really the inciting incident of a massive legal earthquake here.
Absolutely right.
And we were looking directly at the firsthand account of the EFF legal team who handled this, specifically Cindy Kahn, who was the legal director at the time. To understand why a retired tech walking in with schematics was such a bombshell, we first need to understand the legal environment they were operating in, right?
Right. We have to rewind a few years to 2001, just right after the 9/11 attacks.
Exactly.
Because in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, the U.S. government introduced the Patriot Act. And the EFF lawyers essentially locked themselves in a room for days, poring over this massive 3-inch thick printout of this proposed legislation.
A 3-inch stack of paper.
Yeah, they were frantically trying to parse every single line, to figure out how it was going to impact digital privacy, internet routing, and fundamental civil liberties.
Well, see, I am stuck on the timeline here because 9/11 happens, and then practically overnight, there is a 3-inch stack of highly technical, incredibly dense surveillance law, just sitting there ready to go.
I know.
The text says it seemed like it was just sitting in an envelope on someone's desk with a note that read, "Open at the next crisis." That kind of comprehensive legislation does not get drafted from scratch in a matter of weeks. Wait, the text says this was mostly a recycled package of FBI laws that failed to pass after the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. So did they basically just dust off an old wish list?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, you are hitting on exactly what the legal community realized at the time. This wasn't written from scratch.
Right.
A massive portion of the Patriot Act was essentially a recycled package of FBI surveillance requests. Like you said, it was a wish list of expanded powers that law enforcement had actually tried to pass years earlier in 1995.
But it got rejected back then.
Exactly. Congress decided it went too far. But after 9/11, the political climate completely shifted, right? And that old wish list was suddenly fast-tracked into law. We aren't taking a political stance on the legislation itself here, but the factual reality for the EFF was that things were fundamentally changing.
So the tools were already designed. They were just waiting for the right moment to deploy them.
Precisely. And to really grasp what this meant practically, we have to look at how surveillance law operated before this moment. Prior to 9/11, the legal framework relied on a strict, legally defined wall.
A wall between agencies, you mean?
Yeah. Exactly. On one side of the wall, you had foreign surveillance. That is the domain of the NSA. They operate under national security rules, dealing with foreign adversaries, spies, international threats, and they have incredibly powerful, sweeping tools to do that.
Okay.
On the other side of the wall, you have domestic surveillance. That is handled by the FBI for local law enforcement, and they are bound by the strict constraints of the Fourth Amendment. So they need probable cause, they need to go to a judge, and they need a specific warrant for a specific person.
Got it. So you couldn't just take the NSA's massive foreign spy tools and point them at an apartment building in Chicago.
Right. That was the entire theory behind the wall. The awesome sweeping powers of the NSA would never be turned inward against the American people. But the Patriot Act, along with secret executive authorizations happening at the same time, severely eroded that wall.
Wow, so powers designed for foreign threats were now allegedly being turned inward.
Yeah, the factual reality for organizations like the EFF was that the barrier between foreign intelligence gathering and domestic law enforcement was just dissolving.
Which explains the dark rumors that started circulating in the tech industry around 2002 and 2003, right? Like, the EFF was hearing from tech friends people at major telecommunications companies would meet EFF staff for coffee and whisper, "You wouldn't believe what the NSA is doing inside the United States right now."
Yeah, they'd say things like, I can't go on the record, I'd go to prison, but it is massive. They are sitting on the wire.
Sitting on the wire.
Yeah.
But, I mean, a whisper in a coffee shop is not evidence.
No, not at all. A rumor, no matter how highly placed the executive telling it to you is, gives you absolutely nothing you can take into a federal court.
Right. You can't file a lawsuit to stop an unconstitutional surveillance program if you don't have, like, actual admissible proof that the program exists. Which brings us back to the man in the trench coat. Mark Klein didn't just have rumors. He had the physical, structural blueprints of exactly how the surveillance was happening. Here's where it gets really interesting.
It really does.
Because up until this point, domestic surveillance was just this abstract legal fear. Mark made it physical. He'd been an AT&T technician for years. And in 2003, he was transferred to a specific major telecommunications facility on Folsom Street in San Francisco.
Right.
His job was to maintain the room where AT&T's internal fiber optic network connected to the wider internet backbone.
Yeah, and those connections are what network engineers call peering links.
Okay, peering links.
To understand why Folsom Street is so important, you really have to remember that the internet isn't just one giant machine. It is a collection of thousands of smaller networks owned by different companies, all agreeing to connect with each other.
Right, they have to talk to each other.
Exactly. So a peering link is the physical place where a massive network, like AT&T's, shakes hands and exchanges data with other massive networks.
So on the 7th floor of this Folsom Street building, you have these massive, thick fiber optic cables converging. They're carrying a staggering percentage of the entire country's internet traffic, like emails, web browsing, financial transactions, everything.
Everything.
And Mark explained to the legal team that the 7th floor made total sense. It was just standard telecom infrastructure. But then he showed them the blueprints for the 6th floor.
Right. Because sometime in 2002, a highly secure secret room was built on that 6th floor. It was designated Room 641A.
Room 641A.
Yeah, and AT&T instituted this bizarre new rule. No standard technician was allowed inside. It was accessible only to a tiny handful of workers who possessed an active NSA security clearance.
And Mark obviously didn't have that clearance.
No, he didn't, but he was the guy tasked with maintaining the physical cables running right up to the door.
And what he found installed just outside Room 641A was a piece of hardware called a splitter cabinet. Now, to really visualize what a massive deal this is, let's step away from the tech jargon for a second.
Good idea.
Think about it like a physical Y-splitter. You know, the kind you might use to plug two pairs of headphones into a single audio jack so two people can listen to the same song.
Oh yeah, that's a great analogy.
Right. When communications came down from the 7th floor peering links, they hit this massive splitter. One copy went to the intended recipient, just normally, and the other duplicate copy went straight through the wall into the NSA's secret room 641A.
It's exactly like that, because it relies on the physics of light. Fiber optic cables transmit data using pulses of light, not electricity.
Yeah.
You can't just splice them together with a pair of pliers like old copper telephone wires.
Right. If you try to tap a fiber cable manually, you degrade the signal.
Exactly, which alerts the network engineers that a tap is in place. It sets off alarms.
But this splitter cabinet bypassed all of that.
Yeah, it used something called a beam splitter. It is essentially a specialized prism. So when the massive streams of communication came down from the 7th floor, they hit this prism. The beam splitter passively duplicated the photons.
So it literally cloned the light.
Yes. One beam of light, the original data bounced back up to the wider internet and continued to its intended recipient without even a millisecond of delay. The second, perfectly cloned beam of light went straight into room 641A.
Mark Klein looked at this setup and called it the Big Brother machine. because it wasn't some incredibly complex algorithm hunting for specific bad guys. The sheer banality of it is what blew everyone's minds. It was literally just splitting the main pipe in half.
Which is why the scale of this operation is so terrifying. By physically sitting on the wire at the internet's backbone, the NSA didn't have to ask AT&T for specific records.
Right.
They didn't have to serve a warrant for a specific target. They were capturing a complete identical copy of all traffic passing through that hub. They could review everything separately using their own supercomputers inside that secret room without ever slowing the public network down or leaving a trace.
That is wild.
When telecommunications experts eventually reviewed Mark Klein's schematics, they were stunned. One of them actually captured the reality of it perfectly, saying, "This isn't a wiretap, it's a country tap."
A country tap. Wow. They were just passively vacuuming up the entire digital life of the country.
Yeah, exactly.
But having the actual blueprints of a country tap creates a brand new, massive problem for the EFF. Because Mark Klein just handed them secret government schematics.
Yep.
How do you take classified government documents and file them in a public, open court of law to sue the government without immediately going to federal prison yourself?
Right. This sparks one of the most fascinating legal standoffs of the modern era. It really highlights how the justice system struggles to grapple with the concept of state secrets.
Because the EFF knew the danger, right? They knew Mark was taking a massive personal risk that could ruin his life.
Oh, absolutely. So before they did anything else, they secured him an independent, all-star legal defense team. The EFF couldn't represent him directly because they needed him to be a clean, unassailable star witness, completely shielded from AT&T retaliation or DOJ prosecution.
Smart. Once his personal defense was locked in, the EFF made their move. On March 31st, 2006, they filed a motion for a preliminary injunction against the mass surveillance. And attached to that public filing were Mark Klein's declarations and the actual AT&T documents detailing the splitter cabinet.
And, just as a matter of professional courtesy, the lead EFF lawyer, Cindy Cohn, picked up the phone and called the Department of Justice. She called DOJ attorney named Tony Coppolino, someone she actually knew and had faced in court before.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she left a message essentially saying, "Hey, just a heads up, we just filed this evidence regarding the AT&T surveillance."
So when Tony Coppolino calls her back, all professional pleasantries are gone. I mean, he is dead serious.
Yeah.
He warns her that the DOJ needs to see exactly what documents the EFF just filed, because if those documents are classified, simply possessing them on a hard drive or in a filing cabinet is a violation of the Espionage Act.
Right, it is a federal
A
crime.
huge one.
Yeah, and Cohn immediately points out that these are AT&T documents. They are corporate schematics. There are no classification markings on them whatsoever, like no big red top secret stamp anywhere.
Right.
But the DOJ's position is unwavering. The absence of a stamp doesn't matter. Only the government has the authority to determine if information constitutes a state secret. And if they decide it does, well, the EFF is currently holding contraband.
Which leads to this logistics nightmare that is honestly incredibly tense, but also deeply absurd. The DOJ demands to see the documents immediately. EFF says, "Great, we will FedEx them to you right now. Or we can just email you the PDF we filed."
Yeah, naturally.
But the DOJ flatly refuses. They say none of those methods are secure enough for potentially classified material. Instead, the government forces the EFF lawyers to physically hand-deliver a copy of these papers to a SCIF in San Francisco.
Right, SCIF. That stands for Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. It is a highly secure, air-gapped, soundproof vault used by the intelligence community and military to view top-secret information.
It's like something out of a movie.
It really is. You can't bring phones inside. You can't connect to the outside internet. It is a totally sealed environment.
So the lawyers take these corporate blueprints into this high-tech, ultra-secure vault in a federal building just so they can use a machine inside the vault to transmit the documents to the DOJ in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And the only approved transmission method, a massive, ancient, encrypted fax machine.
A fax machine.
Right. They stood there watching this 1990s relic slowly grown out page after page, sending the internet's most advanced fiber optic surveillance secrets over a dial-up tone.
It sounds like a joke about government bureaucracy, but we really need to look at the why behind this friction. The government wasn't just being technologically backward. They were using the protocols of classified information as a weapon.
To intimidate them.
Exactly. Forcing civil rights lawyers to jump through highly controlled, intimidating security clearances, utilizing slow, air-gapped facilities. It is a deliberate mechanism of exhaustion. It drains resources, it delays the legal process, and it constantly reinforces the threat that the lawyers are playing on the government's turf.
That makes total sense. It's a massive flex of state power.
Yeah.
But wait a second, I have a massive question about the core logic here. If the government is allegedly doing something illegal like conducting warrantless mass surveillance on American citizens, which violates the Fourth Amendment, can they just retroactively claim the evidence of their own crime is classified to hide it from a judge?
What's fascinating here is that you are pointing to the ultimate philosophical tension of the state secrets privilege. The EFF firmly believed and argued that the classification system cannot be used as a shield to hide illegal or unconstitutional government actions.
Right, you can't break the law and then stamp top secret on the murder weapon.
Exactly. The executive branch cannot override the Constitution simply by declaring something a secret.
But believing that in theory and actually facing down the Department of Justice in reality are two very different things.
Oh, entirely different. The historical record shows that the lawyers were genuinely sweating over this. They were literally looking up the potential federal prison sentences for illegal possession of classified information.
Wow.
It requires a profound amount of courage to test the limits of executive power. You can be legally and morally right, but when the full weight of the federal government implies you might be committing a felony just by holding a piece of paper, the chilling effect is massive. It underscores the immense personal and professional risk required to challenge state surveillance.
So how does the standoff actually resolve? What happens to Mark Klein in this lawsuit? Because they filed the papers, the DOJ knows they have them, the fax goes through.
Right. Well, the lawsuit, which became known as Hepting v. AT&T, became a massive landmark case. The EFF pushed forward, refusing to be intimidated. The public revelation of Room 641A caused a total media firestorm. It forced the government and the telecommunications industry to publicly acknowledge what had been hidden in the shadows. Now, legally, the story ends with a pretty controversial twist.
What had it?
In 2008, Congress passed the FISA Amendments Act, which effectively granted retroactive legal immunity to telecommunications companies that had participated in the warrantless wiretapping program.
Wait, so AT&T just got off the hook?
They did. The courts ultimately dismissed the lawsuits against the telecoms because Congress changed the law to protect them.
Unbelievable.
But the larger mission of Mark Klein and the EFF succeeded. The country tap was exposed, the mechanisms of mass surveillance were dragged into the light, shifting the entire national conversation about privacy, which eventually paved the way for later reforms.
Because the proof was finally out there.
Exactly, and the government couldn't stuff it back into the classified box.
So what does this all mean for us today? We started this deep dive looking at a massive 3-inch stack of legal papers sitting on a desk after 9/11, just a wish list of expanded powers. And we saw how that abstract legal shift manifested into a very real secret room on the 6th floor of an AT&T building on Folsom Street. A room that bypassed the entire judicial system, exposed not by some master hacker, but by a retired technician in a trench coat who understood how physical cables worked and cared enough to say something.
A really remarkable guy.
It is a powerful reminder that the internet isn't just magic in the air. It isn't just the cloud. It is a physical infrastructure built on light and glass. And those beams of light can literally be split in two without us ever knowing.
This raises an important question for you, listening right now. The source details how the NSA used the physical infrastructure of AT&T fiber optic cables and splitter cabinets to build their Big Brother machine in 2006.
Right.
As our digital infrastructure has rapidly shifted away from physical telecom buildings and into decentralized cloud servers and satellite internet, how has the architecture of surveillance adapted? If Room 641A was the physical country tap of the 2000s, what does the equivalent look like in the cloud today?
Man, that is a chilling thought to leave on, but an essential one to consider as our networks become more complex. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it encourages you to stay curious, to question how things work, and to look a little differently at the invisible networks you rely on every single day. Because underneath the digital magic, there is always plumbing. We'll catch you on the next one.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.